Will is a guy from a poor neighborhood with a brilliant mind who works as a janitor at a university. One day, Professor Gerald gives his students an impossible challenge to solve a math problem that very few people have ever solved, and it took those who did years to do it. As Will is cleaning the school hallways, he comes across the math problem. He looks at it, takes it home, and tries to solve it in his bathroom mirror. The next day, when no one's looking, he grabs a piece of chalk and writes the answer on the blackboard. But as brilliant as Will is, he's also a troubled kid. One day, he recognizes a guy who used to beat him up in high school and decides to go fight him. He does so mercilessly. When a police officer tries to break it up, Will attacks him too and ends up getting arrested. Meanwhile, Professor Gerald asks his students who solved the problem, but no one raises their hand. It isn't until the professor catches Will writing on the blackboard again that he discovers he's the mysterious mathematical genius. But after he's spotted, he runs away. Will meets up with his friends at a bar, where he meets Skylar and impresses her with his intelligence. Intrigued, she gives him her phone number. Professor Gerald looks for Will, asking different people about his whereabouts, and finally shows up at his court hearing for the incident with the police officer. Since Will has a history of robbery and violent behavior, the judge sentences him to prison. But Gerald gets him out on two conditions. He has to take his math class and see a therapist. Will starts seeing two different therapists, but he refuses to open up and makes fun of them, so neither of them can stand him. As a last resort, Professor Gerald asks for help from his old friend, a psychologist named Sean, who agrees to meet with Will. In their first session, Will tries his usual tactic to break Sean. It doesn't work at first, but then Will brings up Sean's late wife, making up false claims about her, saying that she left him or cheated on him. Sean loses it. He grabs Will by the throat and warns him never to disrespect his wife again. After the session, Will has his first date with Skylar. They hit it off right away, connect, and have a great time. They even share a kiss at the end. After that bitter experience, Sean doesn't give up and decides to see Will again. He takes him to a park where he confesses that his wife died of cancer. And Sean also encourages him to trust himself more, open up, and talk, because if he wants to experience better things in his life, he'll eventually have to. This scene teaches us the importance of talking about what we're feeling. Talking heals. As Christian Dunker said, the way we talk about our suffering changes what we suffer. Talking about what hurts us is how we can observe, understand, and redefine what we've had to endure. So, Will leaves the session and calls Skylar, but he's too afraid to talk to her, so he hangs up. Sean and Will meet again, and after they build up a little more trust, the therapist asks him if he has a girlfriend. Will tells him about Skylar and how he hasn't spoken to her since their first date because he's afraid he isn't perfect or smart enough. Sean tells him that neither he nor Skylar are perfect and that what matters is that they're perfect for each other. He gives him the example of his late wife, who, for him, was the most beautiful person in the world, and at the same time, she'd passed gas in her sleep. They both laugh uncontrollably and grow closer. What Sean says is true. No one's perfect. Looking for someone who is will only set us up for disappointment. Love isn't about the absence of differences, but about the harmony between them. The other person is an individual different from me, not another me. So maybe it's about finding a love where paradoxically incompatibility is compatible. But to do that, I think we have to take off our perfection blindfolds and see the other person for who they are, an imperfect being. So, encouraged by Sean, Will goes to look for Skylar, and they have a second date, which goes amazingly well. However, Skylar asks Will about his family, but he's afraid to tell her he's an orphan, so he lies and says he has 12 brothers. Will meets with Sean again and asks him if he ever regretted meeting his wife since her death left him in so much pain. To answer his question, Sean tells him the story of how he met her. He says he first saw her while waiting in line for a historic baseball game. Will is excited to hear that Sean was at that game, so he asks him to describe everything he experienced there. But Sean reveals that he never actually went into the game. He chose to go somewhere else with the girl he had just met, the same girl who ended up becoming his wife. Will can't believe that Sean chose to spend time with a girl over watching a historic game.
But in response to Will's question, Sean tells him that he's never regretted not seeing that live game or meeting his wife and having her in his life, even if it was only for a few years. The pain of grief doesn't compare to the joy of having shared his life with her. Meanwhile, Professor Gerald talks to Sean about Will, and they argue because they want different things for him. Gerald wants him to work as a mathematician, while Sean wants him to choose the path he wants for himself. On the other hand, Skylar is moving to California to continue her studies and wants Will to go with her, but he says he can't. Skylar confronts him, asking why he's afraid of commitment and why he lies to her, reminding him that he lied about his brothers.
He loses control and tells her he was an orphan and that he spent most of his life moving from family to family and that his adoptive father also abused him. Skylar starts to cry and tells him that she loves him and wants to help him, but Will lies again, telling her he doesn't love her, and he leaves. Afterward, Professor Gerald convinces Will to accept a job interview as a mathematician. Will shows up but makes no effort to get hired. He simply doesn't know what he wants to do with his life. Or rather, he doesn't want to listen to what his heart truly wants. Will says goodbye to Skylar, who is about to leave for California, and with the hope that they'll get back together, she tells him that she loves him. Will smirks but doesn't have the guts to say what he really feels, afraid of getting hurt. Will and Sean have another session, and this time, the therapist has a file in his hands that contains photos of Will's body, covered in bruises from the abuse he suffered from his adoptive father. Sean reveals that his father was an alcoholic and that he also hit him and his mother. Hearing Sean's story, Will remembers his own adoptive father. Sean stands in front of Will and tells him that whatever happened to him, it's not his fault. Will nods, but Sean repeats that it's not his fault. Will says he knows, but Sean insists on repeating that he's not to blame for anything that happened. Then Will breaks down. He cries and pushes Sean away, and Sean repeats once more that the abuse he suffered as a child isn't his fault. Finally, Will allows himself to feel. He sobs uncontrollably and hugs Sean tightly. This is where I'll stop. How many people grew up believing it was their fault their parents got divorced, that it was their fault someone hurt them? If you're one of those people, let me remind you, it's not your fault. The only thing you're responsible for is your own actions, not anyone else's. Nothing you didn't decide or do can be your fault. Maybe it's time to free yourself from this burden that no one should have to carry for the rest of their life, because it's unbearable and keeps you from moving forward. Will does it. He frees himself from the heavy burden of his past and is ready to move on with his life. He tells Sean that he's going to take one of the jobs Professor Gerald set up for him. They hug and say goodbye for the last time. Sean tells him he'll always be there for him and suggests he let his heart guide him. This last piece of advice resonates with Will, so at the end, he writes a letter to Sean, revealing that he's decided not to take the job and will go to California to find Skylar. Just like Sean chose to follow his love instead of watching the baseball game, Will also followed his heart.